Ever been told you're out of your mind and then later everyone pretends they always agreed with you? Well, I personally have been proven wrong a lot of times by people after I gloated over them for being wrong, only to find out I was the one who was wrong 6 months after the argument and then go into hibernation for the rest of the year, but these people were the total opposite of me. This video hits real-life stories of people who stuck to their weird ideas, got laughed at, but ended up having the last laugh. Christine Collins. Back in 1928, Christine Collins woke up to a nightmare that doesn't leave your bones. Her 9-year-old son, Walter, vanished from Los Angeles without a trace, something not every parent would be thrilled about, except you were, of course, Elon Musk. The search was relentless. Police faced a lot of public pressure and media scrutiny. Then, several months later, the authorities announced a breakthrough, that Walter had been found in Illinois. They arranged a dramatic reunion and paraded the boy before cameras. The policemen were glad they won't be called washed-up has-beens at work. The woman was glad she finally saw her son after several months. Everything was all great and good, up until she found out he wasn't really her son. She told officers the boy was an imposter, but they didn't believe her. They kept on insisting some random kid was hers. The officers claimed she was confused, emotionally fragile and unstable. They pushed her to accept him publicly, even though she pleaded with them. Christine probably was like, "Why would I want to accept some kid who isn't mine, you numbskulls?" For that, she was accused of hysteria and forcibly committed to a psychiatric ward under a Code 12 order, a tool used to silence people deemed troublesome or crazy. But she never wavered. She launched her own investigation and found evidence the boy was actually a runaway named Arthur Hutchins, trying to escape a troubled home. He admitted to impersonating Walter, lured by the promise of a train ride to California and perhaps a better life. Later on, she was released, vindicated by public outrage. Christine didn't find her son, but she never stopped searching. She sued the LAPD and won, but they paid absolutely nothing. Ignaz Semmelweis. In the mid-19th century, hospitals became breeding grounds for death. Young women entering maternity wards often left in coffins, the cause labeled vaguely as childbed fever. The mortality rate was staggering, and no one could explain why. Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician, started asking the questions no one wanted to entertain. He observed that the doctor's ward had far higher death rates than the midwives' ward. The primary difference was that doctors performed autopsies before delivering babies. Semmelweis, being the wise man that he is, suspected something unseen was being transferred from corpses to the mothers. So he proposed a very simple solution, that everyone needed to wash their hands with chlorinated lime after autopsies. After implementing his method, mortality rates dropped dramatically. Patients stopped dying, yet Semmelweis's colleagues resisted the idea. They rejected the notion that something invisible could spread disease. They took offense at the implication that they, who were supposed to save lives, were causing death. Semmelweis pushed harder. He published data, argued forcefully, and tried to reform hospital practices. He was dismissed from his position, ridiculed, and eventually institutionalized. His life ended in a mental asylum, where he died following beatings and neglect. Years later, the emergence of germ theory confirmed what Semmelweis had claimed. Microorganisms could indeed spread infection. Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was a visionary, a rebel inventor whose ideas often defied the limits of his time. While most people in the late 19th century were preoccupied with improving existing technology, Tesla was imagining whole new worlds of energy, motion, and communication. He championed alternating current, while others were deeply invested in direct current. AC could travel longer distances with less energy loss, making it ideal for powering cities. But it was controversial, because public stunts, including ones orchestrated by Thomas Edison, tried to demonize AC as dangerous. Tesla didn't back down. With support from industrialist George Westinghouse, his AC system triumphed and became the backbone of modern electrical grids. But he didn't stop there. He dreamed of wireless communication long before radios, envisioned smartphones before the term even existed, and conceived of remote control robots at a time when most machines were steam-powered. He once lit lamps without wires in his lab using resonant inductive coupling, a form of wireless energy we're still exploring today. Tesla's eccentricities and lack of business savvy meant many of his achievements were overshadowed or stolen. He died in relative obscurity and poverty. But today he's celebrated for being daring to imagine the unimaginable, to see what no one else saw, and to believe in a future shaped by innovation and bold thinking. Barry Marshall. For years, ulcers were blamed on stress, spicy food, and excessive acid. The conventional wisdom saw these stomach lesions as lifestyle-induced, manageable with antacids or dietary changes. No one suspected bacteria, not in the acidic environment of the human stomach. It simply didn't. But Barry Marshall didn't buy the common explanation. Alongside pathologist Robin Warren, he identified a spiral-shaped bacterium, Helicobacter pylori, in the stomach lining of patients suffering from ulcers. The presence of this organism contradicted everything the medical establishment believed. Publishing his findings wasn't enough. The scientific community resisted the idea that bacteria could survive and cause damage in stomach acid. The skepticism was so deep that Marshall realized data alone wouldn't win the argument, so he did the unthinkable. In 1984, he ingested H. pylori himself. Days later, he developed symptoms of gastritis, precisely the condition linked to early-stage ulcers. A biopsy confirmed the bacterium had taken hold, and he was proven right. Ulcers were no longer seen as a vague reaction to emotional or dietary strain. They were treatable infections. Antibiotics, not antacids, became the remedy. William Coley. In the late 1800s, cancer was nearly always a death sentence. Chemotherapy and radiation hadn't yet been discovered, but Dr. William Coley, a young surgeon in New York, noticed something strange. Patients who developed serious infections after surgery, particularly erysipelas, a type of strep infection, sometimes saw their tumors shrink or disappear entirely. Most dismissed it as coincidence. Coley didn't. He began researching past medical records and found multiple cases of cancer regression following acute bacterial infections. Boldly, he hypothesized that the immune system, revved up by the infection, might also be attacking the cancer. So he went one step further. He tried to recreate the effect intentionally. Coley developed a mixture of killed bacteria dubbed Coley's toxins. He injected it into cancer patients, hoping the induced fever and immune response would combat the tumors. Many doctors balked. The approach was unconventional, risky, and lacked rigorous clinical trials. But results trickled in. Some patients, particularly those with bone or soft tissue cancers, experienced shocking remissions. Others saw no benefit. The medical establishment didn't embrace Coley's ideas. With the rise of radiation and chemotherapy in the 20th century, his methods were pushed to the margins. He died in relative obscurity, his work largely forgotten. Until recently. Modern immunotherapy, using the body's own defenses to fight cancer, is now one of the fastest growing fields in oncology. And William Coley? He's widely considered its grandfather. His intuition, once mocked, proved visionary. He was right, nearly a century ahead of his time. Bennet Omalu. Bennet Omalu arrived in the United States in the mid-1990s as a forensic pathologist. In 2002, he performed an autopsy on Mike Webster, a former Pittsburgh Steelers center, whose decline into cognitive impairment and mood disorders baffled families and doctors. During tissue analysis, Omalu observed abnormal accumulations of tau protein in Webster's brain, identical to patterns seen in boxers who suffered repeated head traumas. Omalu published his findings in 2005, defining chronic traumatic encephalopathy as a distinct neuropathological condition linked to repetitive head impacts. He described microscopic lesions, tauopathies, and brain atrophy in Webster's hippocampus and frontal cortex. His paper challenged prevailing beliefs that concussions were minor or temporary injuries. When he submitted his work to neurosurgery, reviewers affiliated with the National Football League objected. The journal's editorial board initially redacted his paper under industry pressure. Omalu persisted, revising the manuscript and confronting the narrative that professional football posed minimal long-term risks. His persistence secured publication and prompted further studies at Boston University, confirming CTE in dozens of former athletes from football, hockey, and even military veterans exposed to blast injuries. His contributions reshaped sports medicine and neurology, elevating brain trauma from an accepted occupational hazard to a preventable public health issue. Sinead O'Connor. In 1992, Irish singer-songwriter Sinead O'Connor walked onto the Saturday Night Live stage to perform. Instead of choosing a track from her own repertoire, she sang Bob Marley's War, a song about oppression and injustice. As she sang the final lines, she held up a photo of Pope John Paul II and tore it in half. "Fight the real enemy," she said to the stunned silence. The backlash was instant and ferocious. NBC received thousands of complaints. Religious groups condemned her. Her records were pulled from stores. She was booed at concerts and banned from many venues. The world branded her as unstable, disrespectful, and even dangerous. But O'Connor wasn't trying to shock for shock's sake. She had long spoken out against child abuse, particularly within the Catholic Church, a topic largely ignored or denied at the time. Years later, massive investigations exposed systemic abuse within the Catholic Church and, to some extent, confirmed what O'Connor had been trying to highlight. John Snow. In 1854, London was in the grip of a deadly cholera outbreak. The prevailing belief was that the disease spread through miasma, which is foul air emanating from garbage, sewage, and decay. Doctors clung to this idea, seeing no reason to challenge it. But John Snow, an English physician and early pioneer of anesthesiology, thought differently. He suspected that cholera came not from the air but from contaminated water. Snow didn't rely on speculation. He mapped out cholera cases, street by street in Soho. One cluster stood out. Dozens of deaths linked to people living near or drawing water from the Broad Street pump. Using interviews and death records, Snow built a geographical case showing that the outbreak radiated from a single source, the water from that pump. He presented his findings to officials and urged them to disable the pump by removing its handle, and they did. The spread of cholera dropped sharply. But Snow's theory wasn't widely accepted. Many dismissed his work because germ theory hadn't yet taken root. He didn't know the exact pathogen or how it functioned, he just knew the pattern pointed to the pump. His logic clashed with the dominant narrative, and he had little institutional support. Years later, microbiology confirmed cholera's cause, a bacterium transmitted through water. Snow's work became foundational. Galileo Galilei. In the early 17th century, the prevailing belief was that Earth sat at the center of the universe. Everything. Sun, moon, stars revolved around it. This geocentric view was deeply rooted, not just in science but in religion and culture, and questioning it wasn't just considered intellectual dissent, it was heresy. Galileo Galilei, armed with a telescope he designed himself, began studying the night sky. His discoveries undermined the Earth-centered model. He observed moons orbiting Jupiter, proving that not everything circled Earth. He documented the phases of Venus, which could only be explained if Venus orbited the Sun. He saw sunspots, revealing the Sun wasn't a flawless celestial sphere. Each observation pointed toward a heliocentric reality. Galileo didn't stay silent. He published his findings and argued that Copernicus's heliocentric model was correct. Earth revolved around the Sun, not the other way around. Authorities responded with fury. The Church saw heliocentrism as contradicting Scripture. Scientific leaders resisted the shift from tradition. Galileo was summoned to Rome, placed on trial by the Inquisition, and forced to recant. His books were banned. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest, forbidden to teach or publish on the subject. Centuries later, the heliocentric model became the foundation of astronomy. Galileo's methods, empirical observation, data-driven reasoning, and mathematical precision laid the groundwork for the scientific method itself. Alan Turing. In the shadow of World War II, while nations scrambled for dominance, Alan Turing was quietly building something that hadn't existed before, a machine that could think in logical steps and solve problems, what we now call a computer. At Bletchley Park, Britain's secret code-breaking headquarters, Turing led efforts to crack the German Enigma cipher. Each message encrypted by the machine had 150 quintillion possible combinations. It was as close to unbreakable as technology had ever been. Turing constructed an electromechanical device, the bomb, that could sift through these possibilities and isolate probable keys. His invention decoded Nazi communications, shortened the war, and saved millions of lives. But Turing's impact stretched beyond code-breaking. In 1950, he published a paper proposing the idea of a thinking machine, an entity that could simulate human reasoning. He outlined a test to evaluate whether machines could mimic intelligence convincingly enough that people couldn't tell the difference, now known as the Turing test. His insights laid the mathematical foundation for artificial intelligence. He also made profound contributions to biology, modeling how patterns like stripes and spirals form in nature through chemical reactions and equations. It was groundbreaking work that scientists still build upon today. Despite his genius, Turing was persecuted. He was prosecuted for homosexuality, then criminalized under British law. Sentenced to chemical castration, he died 2 years later under circumstances widely believed to be suicide. Don't forget to check out the video description for more goodies. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and join our communities down below.